So really the rest of our meeting is both looking back and looking forward. And we're going to start by looking back and highlighting or actually sharing some information, a lot of information actually, on what's been accomplished recently. And I'm thankful that we'll be joined by three leaders doing this work: Alan Talheim and Mike Centetos from CAL FIRE, and Marissa Christensen from the state's Climate and Wildfire Institute. So let's turn it over to you, Alan.
Great. Thank you, Secretary Garfoot. So I'm going to talk a little bit about data. The first thing we're going to do is give you an update on the Interagency Treatment Dashboard. And then we're going to talk about a couple of ways that having all of this spatial data, having all this information about the work that we're doing out on the ground can enable a lot of really great analyses to understand the effectiveness of all of these investments and provide some information about the type of work that we're doing out on the landscape and how much good we're doing. So I'm going to talk about the data, then I'm going to talk about the field treatment effectiveness reporting that Chief Berlant mentioned earlier. I'm going to turn it over to Mike. He's going to give us a little bit of a deeper dive on some analysis work that CAL FIRE has done, and then Marissa Christensen from Climate and Wildfire Institute is going to give us a big picture trends about wildfire in California. I'm being a little quiet, apparently. Okay, so treatment tracking dashboard. That's the first topic. So here we have Interagency Treatment Dashboard version 2.0. So if you go right now to interagencystreatmenttracker.org, I think is the web address. You can also get to it from the CAL FIRE webpage. You'll see that we have, as of this morning, updated to version 2.0. A couple things I want to point out, a couple new features. Obviously, we have data from 2024 available here. And we also have a new feature where if you click there, you can see all of the years together from 2021 through 2024. And then also down in the corner here, you can see trends through time available there. I also want to point out that I know there's a lot of community here who are planners, scientists who are using these data. If you go to the task force website, scroll to the bottom of the page, you'll see updated feature services and geodatabases, and that data set is broader than what you're seeing on the dashboard. The dashboard is just those full complete years from 2021 through 2024, but the data set that we've built goes back further in time. It includes some data from 2025. It includes activities and partners that aren't showing up on the dashboard because they're not counting towards this million acre strategy, but it's all there. It's all there as a resource, and I want to remind you of that. It's been one of the really gratifying things for me and my partner, Emily Brody from CAL FIRE, who built this thing, to see all the different ways that people are using this data set, and that's been really unexpected and things that we didn't anticipate. I also want to point out how much this is an interagency partnership, and that this is perhaps the biggest accomplishment of this data set is just all of the different folks who are all involved and contributing data to this system and actively participating in our work group and actively sending data into the system. I also want to highlight the San Diego Supercomputing Center at UC San Diego, who provides the technical support for this. In the background over the last year, they've been busy tearing down the existing code and rebuilding it in a way that's more open access, more stable, and faster for us to do updates. They've done really tremendous work, and I want to call them out for that. But truly, this is a great interagency partnership across the federal and state governments, and also with private partners such as Cal Forests representing the timber industry. To give you a refresher and reminder of the things that we are counting and how we are counting these data, the dashboard contains two different metrics. One is these activity acres. And so you can imagine a hypothetical piece of ground out in the forest somewhere. Maybe you, at the beginning of the year, you're going to come out and do a thinning, mechanical thinning with a masticator or other equipment. Then you need to pile the residues that you've created, the dead trees and branches and things like that. And then you're going to come back again and burn those piles, and then maybe you'll come back a fourth time to do a broadcast burn across the area and really reduce those fine fuels. Each one of those entries takes money, takes planning, takes bodies out on the ground, and so we want to track all of that effort. So the activity acres is really our means of tracking all of that effort and accounting for all of that effort and crediting all the work that's being done out on the ground. But we also realized that we need to get some sense of the geography of the landscape that we're treating. So we call that the footprint. So we would stack all those four pieces together and say that all those activities happened on the same acre of ground, we're going to count that once as the geographic footprint. I want to say the analysis that goes into creating that footprint is quite complicated. Here it looks very nicely like we're stacking dominoes on top of each other, but it's really oftentimes more like a box of jigsaw pieces all layered up together. And so doing this math is quite hard. And I want to again thank UCSD for helping us with that. So what does the 2.0 numbers say for 2024? It says we've been able to sustain the high level of activity that we had in 2023. We're a bit over 1 million acres of activities for 2024. Federal acres went up. Private acres went down slightly. State acres stayed about the same in terms of activity. And I also want to point out that these numbers here on this bar graph contains about 10,000 acres of Caltrans contract work. That's not on the dashboard. They didn't have a requirement to provide spatial data to their contractors when they created those contracts years ago because we didn't have a dashboard, a tracking system. So we know that work happened, but we don't have spatial data on it, so it's not on the dashboard. But I do want to recognize that contribution. And I also want to step back and put this in some broader context. So here is a graph of going back to 2019 of just Forest Service work and CAL FIRE work. These are organizations that had some practice in counting acres prior to the dashboard, so we have some longer term data from them. And you can see just how much work has ramped up in the last couple of years. Excuse me. For Forest Service, we have an even longer record through their data reporting system, 3 years at a time, but we don't really have that great of CAL FIRE data prior to 2019. But we can say that we know for sure that CAL FIRE has ramped up activities during the current administration. Prior to FY 1920, the grant programs in CAL FIRE were treating about 10,000 acres per year for the several years before that. But since that time, those same grant programs have been treating about 50,000 to 90,000 acres per year. So we know that the investments that we've been making in wildfire resilience over the last 5 or so years have really increased the level of activity happening on the ground in California. So what kind of work happened out on the ground in California in 2024? A lot of it was fuels reduction, a lot of it was prescribed fire, but we also had significant amounts of tree planting and grazing and some timber harvest as well that happened out on the landscape. That's how we're getting to a bit over 1 million acres. Who did that work? The Forest Service was the largest organization contributing acres, or they contributed the largest number of acres. Industrial timber companies, CAL FIRE, and then I also want to call out Caltrans and Fish and Wildlife as organizations who you may not think of as large players in wildfire resilience, but who really did do a lot of acres in 2024. In terms of where this work happened, this is just by ownership. This doesn't necessarily say who is doing this work, but this analysis of footprint is just where that work took place. We know that there are a lot of state investments happening on federal lands, a lot of great partnership there. So most of the work happened on federal ground, but also a significant amount of work that happened on private industrial ground in California, state ground in California, and then also private non-industrial ground, as well as some other land ownership types. The trends in footprint acres, we can see we're about the same as what we were in 2023. A little bit of a decrease in private industrial acres, but the other areas largely the same or a little bit up from 2023. Prescribed fire, there's been a lot of policy emphasis in California on getting more prescribed fire on the ground. Our prescribed fire numbers for 2024 were actually down a little bit from 2023, but I also want to point out that prescribed fire is something that's very vulnerable year to year to variation. It goes up when there's good weather for prescribed fire. It can go down when there's a lot of wildfire activity because of the same resources that are doing prescribed fire are often the people fighting fires. So it goes up and down through time. But I also want to point out that as of this month, CAL FIRE alone has already treated more acres this year with prescribed fire than all state entities did last year. So there's just more evidence of how those prescribed fire numbers are generally trending upward, but there is some annual variation year to year. Again, Chief Berlant kind of beat me to this a little bit earlier, but CAL FIRE's numbers for 24-25 are an improvement. We're continuing to see an increase in the fuels reduction work that CAL FIRE is doing in terms of both mechanical hand fuels reduction and also prescribed fire out on the landscape. All right, pivoting now to our fuels treatment effectiveness reporting that we do in CAL FIRE. If you go to the CAL FIRE homepage, fire.ca.gov, and scroll about halfway down, you'll see this little box set on the webpage with three little sections, one that says fuels reduction, one that says fuel treatment effectiveness, and one that says fuel treatment effectiveness reports. I'm going to be talking about the latter two. For fuel treatment effectiveness reporting, this is work that CAL FIRE does when a wildfire encounters one of our mapped fuel treatments. So again, we have the spatial data that it's allowing this fuel treatment effectiveness to happen. We send folks out there and to say, what happened here when this fire encountered this fuel break? What changed? Did it change fire behavior? Were firefighters able to use this for ingress or egress? Were they able to use it as a control line? Or did the fire just blow right through and this fuel treatment was totally ineffective at all? So, we call it a positive impact when it assisted with containment, assisted with ingress, egress, reduced property damage, or changed fire behavior. So we have its dashboard. If you click on that middle link, you'll be able to see. So this data are actually a couple of weeks old. And there's actually more fires that have been reported out now. But as of this screenshot, we had 116 treatments that were part of this system. So that was across 76 fires. So some of these fires are encountering more than one fuel treatments. And 94 of those fuel treatments had positive impacts. So that's 81% success rate, which is pretty good, I think, particularly given the conditions under some of these fires are burning. So top positive effects were effects on fire suppression, so firefighter ingress, egress, and used as contingency line. But we also did see a lot of changes in fire behavior as well. And I also want to point out the fuel treatment effectiveness reports. So the dashboard is really some high-level summary information, but we also have these fuel treatment effectiveness reports, which gives you a deeper dive, a narrative to understand what was actually happening. It describes the fire conditions, describes how the firefighters may have interacted with the fuel break and the fire, and how all those different pieces came together to make the fuel treatment either effective or ineffective. With that, I'm going to call up Mike Centetos, and he's going to take over and give you a little bit of information about some of our climate investments funding and for wildfire resilience. Thanks.
Can you all hear me okay? I gotta make these things taller for me. Great. Well, thanks, Alan. Thanks, everybody. I want to spend a few minutes talking about an approach CAL FIRE is taking to really try to understand the outcomes of some of the investments we're making in forest and wildfire resilience. So again, this is getting beyond dollars spent, acres treated, and really what are we accomplishing? What are the benefits we're seeing on the ground? And I want to really make sure to recognize my colleagues, Kevin Welch and Jason Singh, I think are both in the room, who are both really leaders on this effort. So we focused this analysis on a commitment the legislature made under SB 901, which was a $200 million annual appropriation through the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund to CAL FIRE over a 5-year period. That's since been extended, but we focused just on the first 5 years for these purposes. You can see in this graph here that most of this funding went to the CAL FIRE Forest Health and Wildfire Prevention Grant Programs. So the former really kind of landscape level treatments, and then the latter being more kind of community-oriented fuels reduction, planning, education efforts, as well as CAL FIRE's fuels reduction crews. That's represents the lion's share of that yellow bar that's third from the top there. All told, CAL FIRE has granted more than 660 grants out of this funding, and our crews have supported more than 200 different projects. So a lot of work going on the ground here. And what we tried to do is we tried to really identify and quantify where we could, where we are achieving or how we are achieving outcomes for each of these pillars of resilience. We relied on that pillars of resilience framework and tried to drill in and say, where do we have methods where we can say something about how this treatment benefited this particular value? One thing to keep in mind is that many of the treatments that we included in our analysis hadn't been fully implemented at the time we did this project. And so much of what I'm going to be sharing are projected outcomes, what we're anticipating will happen based on what we know now. So I'm going to highlight just a couple of these outcomes or a couple of these pillars to give you a sense of what we found. So a key goal of the Forest Health Program is really to make forests more resilient to wildfire and disturbance, right? We know that most forests are overly dense. They'll be more resilient if they have larger trees that are well spaced. This will translate to less competition for resources, fewer ladder fuels, larger, more fire and pest resistant trees, more stable carbon stocks, et cetera, et cetera. So those are the two kind of key metrics for resilience we were looking at is density and tree size. And what we did is we modeled these forest health treatments to understand how they were changing or how we would expect them to change forest structure compared to baseline conditions. And what you can see here is that we saw a significant decrease in density. So that's that blue line that's below the baseline, and a significant increase in average tree size. That's the red line that's above the baseline, which is exactly what we want to see. We're seeing these treatments resulting in less dense forests with larger, more fire-resistant trees. And I'll just note, you can see this, these lines kind of converging back toward the baseline over time. That's just showing the importance of maintenance treatments, right? That these treatments are not kind of a one and done and walk away, that we need to keep coming back to these areas. So this data is giving us pretty good confidence that we're increasing forest resilience over more than 150,000 acres. But what does that mean for fire? So the Forest Health Grant Program, again, we're hoping to promote conditions on the ground where we're getting that low and moderate severity wildfire as opposed to the catastrophic high severity fire that's going to go through and kill all the trees. So we took those modeled conditions for baseline and treatment conditions that we talked about on the last slide, and we simulated wildfire through both sets of conditions. And we looked at these key metrics of burn probability and flame length. And what we saw was significant reductions in both burn probability and flame length under treated conditions compared to the baseline conditions. Now, flame length in particular is a proxy for fire severity. So this gives us really good confidence that because we're seeing this extreme decline in flame length, that we're going to see significantly less high severity fire over this 150,000 acres. So again, that's the outcome that we're hoping for here. Now we can take this a step further even. We simulated wildfires through those baseline and treatment conditions. We could actually then put those wildfires through a fire effects model and get out estimates for things like smoke pollutants from wildfires burning under those different conditions. And what we saw, I should say this is a new method that the Climate Action Reserve developed, ended up being fairly challenging for us to implement. So we only did this for one project so far, but we did see really promising results. That wildfires burning across treated conditions emitted far less particulate matter and other pollutants compared to wildfires burning across baseline conditions. So that means these treatments have some real good implications for air quality and public health. The last outcome I want to highlight, because Alan mentioned the fuels treatment effectiveness reports in CAL FIRE's new dashboard, is because many of these treatments have actually been completed, some of them have actually interacted with wildfire, we were able to look at that dashboard and identify 12 of the projects that we had included in our analysis as having interacted with wildfire in the year after this dashboard was launched. And we found that 11 of those 12 projects had beneficial impacts on wildfire. So that's either moderating fire behavior, assisting fire suppression efforts, et cetera. So this does give, this does give us some kind of grounded in reality confidence that the treatments that we're funding and implementing are actually achieving the results that we want to achieve. And those aren't just kind of happening in the modeling world. So just in closing here, we did these analyses for each pillar of resilience. We tried to actually quantify outcomes where we could. The results that we're seeing so far are very promising, and we're working on compiling those into a report that we hope will be available soon. So, excuse me, stay tuned for more on that front. And that's all I've got. So Alan, were you going to introduce Marissa? Do you want me to? Or I can introduce Marissa. We got Marissa Christensen, the Executive Director of the Climate and Wildfire Institute next. Come on up.
Hi, can everybody hear me? Great, okay. Nice to be here today. Thank you, Mike and Alan, for your presentations. They gave you all some really good, optimistic, exciting updates. I now have the privilege of bringing us all down and reminding us why it's so important that we do this work. So let's see. Here we go. So what we're going to do today, what I'm going to do today is go back over some of the wildfire impacts that we saw just at a top line from 2025 and stretching back to some previous years. Some of you may remember that CWI first published our Year in Fire report in February of 2024, and that was a retrospective for fire year 2021. This report is a sort of truncated version of that. I'm not going to get into things like appropriations or workforce impacts. We're looking mostly at social and environmental impacts here. So since that last report, we've made quite a bit of progress, as you've heard from our colleagues earlier. We have some new data on social and ecological impacts that we didn't used to have and that we recommended in that last report. You've heard about a lot of cross-sector collaboration, and that extends beyond interagency collaboration, also looking at community-level collaboration with property owners and the like. And we've seen the launch of the Interagency Treatment Tracker. So before I get into the numbers, I do want to just pause and thank Dr. Lauren Cox, who I think is participating remotely today. She's a member of the Science Advisory Panel and put together the vast majority of the figures that you'll see here today. All right, so jumping straight into it, in terms of wildfire impacts, you're looking at a year-over-year comparison of acres burned and associated air quality impacts, specifically carbon emissions. You'll see that the biggest spikes for both, they follow fairly identical trends, and that was in 2020, largely due to the Creek Fire and the August Complex. Those numbers are equally echoed in, unsurprisingly, structure loss. This graph shows the structures damaged or destroyed by wildfires. And the dotted line there is total acres burned. So you see a little bit of a departure in terms of the trends and how they follow each other. And the most devastating year, of course, for structure loss was in 2018 with the Camp Fire. And then we did see, of course, another spike in structure loss this year with the LA fires. Unsurprisingly and unfortunately, fatalities do tend to follow the same trends as structure loss, again, with the largest year of loss of human life in 2018 with the Camp Fire. And then again, a thankfully smaller spike, but a spike nonetheless from the LA fires this year. I apologize for my voice. I have had a scratchy voice all morning. Okay, moving on to public safety power shutoffs. Again, big spikes in 2019 and 2020 in terms of the number of customers impacted and looking at the yellow line, the duration of those power outages. You'll see normally the number of customers impacted does follow the duration, but we had a little bit of departure from that this year. With the number of customers proportionally being down in terms of impact, largely due to some infrastructure upgrades that LADWP and SoCal Edison have been doing by the way of grid hardening and redundancy. So really important to continue to encourage our utilities to do those upgrades. And those power shutoffs, you could probably guess, affect mostly the populous areas of the state, predominantly in the urban areas of Southern California. Okay, so that was the gloomy stuff. And now we're going to look a little bit at some trends, and I'll talk a bit about a couple of case studies. First and foremost, the kind of exciting part of some of the data that came out this year is around the sociological aspects of wildfire impacts. Megafire Action recently did statewide voter polling and found that when asked whether or not the voters consider wildfires a crisis, a overwhelming majority of them consider it to be a current or a closely looming crisis. That's a bummer for, for all of us as voters feeling this pain, but the good news is that people are in fact paying attention and are supporting more resources going to wildfire. Kind of further delving into that same attitudes, when asked if they're concerned about various impacts of wildfire, they did overwhelmingly, again, respond that they are very concerned or fairly concerned to a whole slate of impacts, but rising to the top for folks have been air quality, wildlife impacts, and the cost and availability of home insurance. I'll also mention that I've recently seen, and some of you have probably seen it as well, some polling done by the Department of Angels in Los Angeles, focused on the survivors who lost homes or had damaged homes from the LA fires. And they too noted that a major barrier to rebuilding has been, again, insurance availability and timelines and payout. So top line, 2025 obviously brought us some unfortunate losses, but not all was lost. We got to have a few more insights into how the public is aware and responding to this crisis. And we saw how our impact metrics, both in wildfire and in mitigation, are continuing to expand. One of the things that I have been most excited about, and that I think you've probably all heard a good deal about at this point, are some of the community level pilots that are going on by the way of home hardening, but linking that to landscape scale treatments and to insurance carriers that are coming in and willing to look at mitigation and model that into their pricing structures. This is an immense opportunity because as we see all of the good work that the folks in this room are doing is scaling across the state, an even greater resource to scale even faster are the members of our community who can and should take responsibility for things like defensible space and home hardening. And it's a tough pill to swallow for some, but this coming year, CWI and many of you here in this room are going to be focusing on learning more about consumer attitudes and incentives to home hardening, and building public awareness and resources for communities to take matters into their own hands and augment all of the impact that all of you are making on the ground. We also have a great opportunity to continue to work with insurance companies to take mitigation into consideration in their pricing structures. And of course, you've seen the power of a federated data platform. There's more to come in that, and we're happy to support. And that is it from me. If you have any questions or want to partner with us, please don't hesitate to reach out. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marissa. And yeah. And really appreciate the Climate and Wildfire Institute's partnership as somebody we work closely, but that has a level of independence that can bring some accountability to the work that we do. I want to open it up to executive committee members for a bit of a discussion. We are on time, so we have about 5 to 10 minutes for questions or a conversation. Supervisor McCauley.
Yeah, thank you, Wade. Quick question. I love the treatment tracker because it's kind of like proof is in the pudding, right? We know it works. It's great. But are we taking that a step farther in looking at what the consequences of no treatment might look like? I know we do a lot of modeling around future conditions and that sort of stuff, but to look at a fuel break and say, okay, this fuel break, not only did it work, but it saved X amount of homes, or we can estimate that it saved X amount of homes. I think that's powerful information for decision makers. And so I'm just curious to get your perspective on it and whether that's been a conversation with CAL FIRE.
To some extent, the work that Mike was leading does that to a degree, in that it's looking at the counterfactual of the treatment versus not having a treatment there. But I think that's interesting feedback for the fuel treatment effectiveness reports that we're doing to think about whether we could integrate some fire behavior modeling into those fuel treatment effectiveness reports in the future. to really get an estimate of something like that. I don't know if that's the thing that I want to commit to. I'm not sure what our capacity is to do something like that, but I think that it could be something that's really fruitful for us to understand.
I have a comment for both Alan and Mike, and then separately for Marissa, and feel free to respond. So appreciate that this 2026 action plan is going to take us beyond just acres, because acres is such a coarse metric for, effectiveness. And we're really focused, I think, we're going to evolve that to more outcomes. At the same time, I think we all recognize that we have to achieve broad scale towards bringing health back to our landscapes and activity on our landscapes. And I think we can be proud of the amount that we've sort of surged. But then if we look at, what the need is, it's larger in terms of scale, whether it's the Air Resources Board scoping plan to reduce pollution and emissions that calls for several million acres of annual treatments by the middle of the century, or we look back in the historic record pre-European contact where there was a lot more activity on the landscape. I think one area for us to drive forward on is the cost effectiveness of treatments. And I know our big idea is to get in, to landscapes with needed thinning, and then ultimately to get some sort of tempo of beneficial fire. And I understand beneficial fire overall is less expensive to put on the landscape than thinning. But I do think if we're looking to the future in the next 10 years, it's like, how do we improve the cost effectiveness or reduce the cost of getting on a landscape and doing the work? Because that's going to be super important. Likewise, getting more private investment back, into our landscape to manage. Simply put, there aren't just going to be enough federal and state tax dollars to do the amount of work that we have to. So both, reducing the cost and then getting more in, private investment is going to be critical. So let me just stop there and ask if you have any thoughts on that.
I have lots of thoughts on that, and I'll try to be concise, but I feel, the same way that we face a real challenge in terms of the amount of resources that we have to get this work done. And I think the task force is going to be laying out a 10-year strategy. But I think it's clear that the resources that we have now and across the state and federal governments aren't necessarily going to be sufficient to do all the work that needs to get done out on the landscape. And so we have to think about doing that work more cost effectively. And I think there are a few different routes that we're exploring around that. One of which is partnering with private industry, try to create markets for this wood that we're bringing off, or grow markets for this wood that we're taking out the forests. Also investing in our workforce and having more people out there on the ground who can do this type of work will also help us do this more cost effectively. And then also I see a really big role for increases in technology. We're seeing things like remote operated masticators out on the landscape now that can do work in places that other masticators can't do. They can be very effective and fast in getting this work done. I think we're going to continue to see more investments in technology in this space over the next decade, and I hope that plays a significant role going forward. But we also need to support those investments. CAL FIRE's been taking some steps to do that, both internally within our own staff, but also through our business development program, where we do also invest in new technologies. But that's also a place where venture capital and philanthropy can also play important roles in supporting the development of new technologies out on the ground and across the landscape. If either of you have anything else you want to add on those points.
I would definitely add utilities having a major role and a major responsibility. And they do have the budget to do a lot of the work and are doing a lot of the work. And just to echo what I already was sort of harping on is community level work, looking at what landscapes are the highest risk around communities that also could stand to do some updating and trying to couple those approaches.
I think one of the things that the analysis Mike talked about does, it moves towards capturing the multiple benefits of these projects. That's a thing that we really try to do with our CAL FIRE Forest Health projects, is fund projects that are having multiple benefits. Yes, there's a wildfire resilience benefit, but there's a watershed benefit. There's a wildlife habitat benefit. If we can grow that quantification and show the stakeholders out there that these projects are having these very clear benefits and quantify those benefits, I think that opens the door to grow the pie of funding and not just rely on the same funding sources that we've had in the past. I think the Climate Bond is a good opportunity to do that, to show our partners in the Wildlife Conservation Board and other places that there you can have these true multi-benefit projects that are creating wildfire resilience at the same time as they're protecting habitat and protecting watersheds.
Yeah, thanks. I'll tell you, I think the piece that state agencies can claim some responsibility for are process improvements that help projects happen faster and more affordably. I note that a lot of the cost of these projects historically has been planning and permitting, for example. So how can we help the projects happen faster and cheaper? And I was talking to utility about how do we help them get, sort of multiple work done on the same footprint at the same time. One of the challenges I hear from community members is utilities having to go back into the same place 3, 4, 5 times and the disruption. Well, think about the cost as well, some of which is borne by the ratepayers. So I do think as we continue to get money out the door on landscape treatments, we should just really lean forward on technology investments, process improvements, how to continue to drive costs down so we can expand the work. And then Marissa, I'm really excited to understand the work that the Institute's going to do to learn from and lift up these different pilots and innovations. I was really energized to understand what's happening in Lake Tahoe in the community of Incline Village, where, as I understand it, philanthropy, including the Moore Foundation and others, has funded neighborhood level commitments to improve defensible space and home hardening, and then brought in a really innovative insurer to say, if there's demonstrable improvements at the neighborhood level, then the insurance, this insurer is willing to write coverage and provide a discount. So is there anything we can do in this, our public agencies to support the innovation? I don't think a lot of the innovation happens by the state. I'm excited to support outside of it, but anything you can say to this?
That's a good question. I think just off the top of my head, working with communities and co-siting where the state lands can be further treated to help augment that mitigation, because what we see in some of these communities anyway is it is the public lands that get treated, and when it gets down to home hardening and community hardening, that is where things can stall out. It's quite a hurdle to clear. I think we have a problem with language. Home hardening is not that appetizing, right? And it's also upfront costs. So I think if we can figure out some sort of financial aid program that provides upfront costs for homeowners, as well as co-locating the treatments that you're doing on public lands, that's a great start.
That's really exciting, and synergizing those investments, so that if we're doing work on forest management and fuel breaks, actually, to your point, coordinating that with a really focused effort to get defensible space and home hardening, because they're synergistic. And then Patrick mentioned this partnership with utilities. I still remember another tour in Tahoe I took with Liberty Utility and the U.S. Forest Service there, where they were coordinating vegetation management on one of their utility lines with forest thinning right next to it. It's beneficial for the energy infrastructure. It's beneficial to reduce broader fire. It just makes so much sense. So I just think this is a real important opportunity for us to just continue to synergize the investments we're making, because it is remarkable how much has been invested between, public sector and private sector. But we know if we're really going to get our arms around this catastrophic wildfire risk, we have to go further and go broader, and that's going to require us to optimize the use of funding. Supervisor.
Thank you. And thanks to the panel. I like that we had a lot of optimistic data coming from Alan and Mike. And then Marissa, I appreciate the gloomy stuff, because I think that's important in keeping the focus on what we need to do. But I wanted to ask a question about impacts from fire emissions on public health. And one of the things, there was this interesting study recently where folks were looking at cyclone damage in the Southeast. And, when we have casualty numbers out that come out of these events. But what they looked at was over decades, what were the impacts on the communities? And of course, well, not of course, but maybe unsurprisingly, the casualty number really grew and grew year after year. So it wasn't just that immediate casualty number, but over years. And so I'm interested in how much data you have, how much data we collectively have out there that can tell that story, because back to this point about cost effectiveness, the more that we can tell a story about how our communities and our public health is impacted by these events, it makes every dollar seem like a better spend. But one of the things from this study, it was pointing out that a major reason for that increase was the loss of personal economic capital, that families who suffered an economic loss, and then the counties suffered an economic loss. And so they didn't have the resources to support their communities. So just interested in, of course, you need a lot of years to do that work, but any thoughts that you have on what we have out there?
Well, we certainly have, by way of CARB, the air quality statistics and some of the public health impacts that come along with that. It's hard to pinpoint exactly how much of that comes from a wildfire versus just the air quality struggles that we are facing as a globe. But I think what's starting to happen now is some of those other impacts, mental health impacts, displacement impacts. And I actually really encourage you to look at the Department of Angels report that just came out, because they did a lot of that research. It's a smaller sample size because it's looking just at those people that were impacted. But it does ask questions around displacement, length of displacement, mental health, job loss, things like that.
Thanks so much. Jason.
Well, so recognizing we're at break time, the thing I would add is that this last 45 minutes was information rich. There was so much information about how treatments can be effective, where they're effective, how to place them, how do we look at scale, how do we look across boundaries, that I would just challenge everybody to rewatch the recording and share it with others and have a conversation with a neighbor, because that the stats about how members of the community are polling, that's our neighbors, that's our friends. And so then it's, what are we doing about it, and how can they be engaged, and how do we engage in that conversation of capacity and funding? Because it's not just going to be through government, it's through our other partners, utilities and others. So anyway, this was great, 45 minutes.
Thank you for that reminder about a break. We're going to take an abbreviated break. So let's just take really 3 to 5 minutes, stand up, stretch, stay in the room if you can, use the restroom, and we'll get back to looking ahead with our next panel.